What happens when one of Britain's most respected actors sits down for what should have been a light, friendly chat about his new film, only to find himself under attack? In just 34 seconds, Coleen Nolan would turn what began as a routine promo spot into one of the most uncomfortable, explosive moments in daytime TV history. Gary Oldman had arrived at the Loose Women's studio that morning, expecting warmth, banter, and the usual polite questions about his latest project. He was calm, courteous, ready to entertain. But the tone of the interview changed almost the moment he sat down on the now infamous purple sofa. The audience settled. Cameras rolled. The panel smiled. At the center of the lineup sat Coleen Nolan, flanked by Ruth Langsford, Janet Street Porter, and Kay Adams. Coleen leaned forward with a smile that looked friendly, but wasn't. "So, Gary," she began, her tone light but laced with something sharper. "Lovely to have you here. But before we get to your film, I just have to ask, isn't it a bit rich for you to criticize Hollywood when it's made you, well, incredibly wealthy?" The atmosphere changed instantly. Ruth's pen froze above her notes. Janet blinked. Kay looked down, lips pressed together. Gary smiled politely, but the warmth had drained from his face. "I wouldn't call it hypocritical, Coleen," he said evenly. "You can appreciate what you've gained from something and still acknowledge its flaws. I think it's possible to love the craft and still want it to evolve." But Coleen wasn't letting go. "Sure," she said, her voice tightening. "It's just hard to take that seriously when you're sitting there in a designer suit, talking about how hard done by actors are. Do you understand how that sounds to normal people?" Gary shifted slightly, hands still folded, tone calm. "I think you're misunderstanding me. I'm not talking about wealth or privilege. I'm talking about integrity, about how stories are told, and how people are treated behind the camera." "Oh, come on," Coleen scoffed, waving a hand. "Creative integrity? You were in Batman, Gary. Don't tell me that was about artistic purity." Ruth tried to step in. "Maybe we should talk about Gary's film." But Coleen cut her off. "No, Ruth, I think this matters. You've made millions from blockbusters, and now you want to lecture everyone about art. Isn't that a bit convenient?" Gary's jaw tightened, his composure thinning but not breaking. "With respect, Coleen, I think you're being unfair. I'm proud of those films, but that doesn't mean I can't care about what the industry could do better." Coleen leaned back, voice rising. "Better? You've been in Hollywood for decades. You've benefited from the system, and now you want to bite the hand that fed you?" Janet finally spoke. "Coleen, I think what Gary's saying is—" "No, Janet!" Coleen snapped. "I want to hear him explain it, because it sounds like he wants to have it both ways. Hollywood royalty and tortured artist," Gary exhaled, measured. "That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we can be grateful for success and still want change. That we can make films that mean something, that treat people, actors, writers, crews, with respect." Coleen laughed then, sharp, derisive. "Respect? You've worked with the biggest directors alive. You've been nominated for Oscars. What more respect do you need?" Gary's answer was quiet. "It's not about me. It's about the people who don't get heard. The ones who work all night for scraps. The young actors who never get a shot because of how things are structured." Coleen scoffed again. "Oh, please. Don't sit there pretending you're some champion of the working class. You probably spend more on a bottle of wine than most people make in a month." The silence that followed was absolute. The studio air turned heavy. Ruth looked stunned. Janet and Kay couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Gary paused, straightened. His expression changed. Calm, resolved, final. And that's when everything shifted. What happens when one of Britain's most admired actors sits down for what should have been a relaxed, friendly chat about his new film, only to be ambushed by condescension and personal attacks? In just 34 seconds, Coleen Nolan would deliver a line so tone-deaf, so shockingly out of place, that it triggered one of the most infamous walkouts in daytime television. Gary Oldman arrived at the Loose Women's studio expecting a typical promotional interview. He'd planned to discuss his latest project, share a few stories, maybe make the audience laugh. Instead, he walked into an interrogation. The cameras rolled. The audience settled. On the panel sat Coleen Nolan at the center, with Ruth Langsford, Janet Street Porter, and Kay Adams beside her. Gary appeared calm, courteous, every inch the professional. "So, Gary," Coleen began, smiling just enough for the camera. "Before we get into the film, I have to ask, don't you think it's a bit hypocritical to criticize Hollywood when it's made you a millionaire?" The mood changed instantly. Ruth looked at her notes. Janet blinked. Kay froze. Gary's smile faltered, but his voice stayed level. "I don't think it's hypocrisy to recognize that an industry you've benefited from can still be deeply flawed," he said. But Coleen pushed harder. "Come on, Gary. You're in a designer suit. You probably arrived in a car worth more than most people's homes. And now you're talking about how badly actors are treated. Do you realize how that sounds?" Gary's tone stayed measured. "You're misunderstanding me. I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about creative integrity, about respect for storytelling and the people who make films possible." Coleen laughed, a dismissive flick of her hand. "Creative integrity? You were in Batman, Gary. Let's not pretend that was about art." Ruth tried to steer things back on track, but Coleen waved her off. "No, Ruth, this is interesting. Gary's spent decades making blockbusters and cashing the checks, and now he wants to lecture us on purity and principle." Gary's expression hardened, his voice cooling. "With respect, Coleen, you're making assumptions about what drives me. I'm proud of my work, including Batman. But caring about better storytelling doesn't mean looking down on success." Colleen's tone sharpened. "You've benefited from the Hollywood machine your whole life, and now you're biting the hand that fed you." Janet tried to intervene. "Coleen, I think what he's saying." But Coleen cut her off. "No, I want to hear him justify it, because it sounds like Gary wants to be both the movie star and the martyr." Gary's patience was thinning. "I'm saying we can do better, that the system can treat people with decency, that stories can matter," Coleen scoffed. "Respect? You've won awards. You've worked with the biggest directors in the world. What more respect do you need?" Gary met her gaze evenly. "It's not about me. It's about the young actors who never get a chance, the writers whose work is gutted, the crews who get worked to exhaustion." Coleen laughed, sharp, cutting. "And now you're the voice of the working class? Please, you spend more on dinner than most people earn in a month." The studio fell silent. The laughter died. The other hosts looked frozen in place. Gary took a long breath, straightened. Something in his expression shifted, quietly, decisively. And that's when the real moment began. "Coleen," Gary said, his voice measured but tense, "I don't think my personal finances are relevant here. I came on to talk about my film, about the work I care about, not to defend my bank account." Colleen's eyebrows shot up, feigning innocence. "Attacked? Gary, I'm just asking some honest questions. If you can't handle a little scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be giving interviews, criticizing the industry that's made you richer than most people could ever dream of." Gary's tone softened, but there was steel underneath. "That's not fair, Coleen. That's not what I've done, and you know it." But Coleen was only getting started. She leaned back, folding her arms, a smirk forming. "You know what I think, Gary? I think you've forgotten where you came from. You've been living in your Hollywood bubble for so long, you've lost touch with reality." Gary's eyes narrowed. "I beg your pardon? Well, it's true, isn't it?" Coleen pressed, clearly enjoying herself now. "When was the last time you took a bus? Worried about a heating bill? You talk about the struggles of ordinary people, but you haven't been ordinary in decades." Ruth Langsford glanced nervously toward the producers off camera, silently begging for a break. "Coleen, maybe we should—" "No, Ruth!" Coleen snapped. "Let me finish." She turned back to Gary. "You live in a mansion in Los Angeles. You drive luxury cars. You probably have staff. And yet you want us to believe you understand the working class." Gary's reply came out low and deliberate. "Coleen, my background is working class. I grew up in South London. My father left when I was 7. My mother raised 3 boys on her own. I know exactly what struggle looks like." Coleen didn't blink. "That was 40 years ago, Gary. What have you done lately to help the people you claim to care about so much?" Gary's composure cracked for the first time. "That's not something I need to broadcast. But since you're asking, I've supported charities quietly. I've mentored young actors. I've used my platform to push for better conditions in the industry." Coleen rolled her eyes. "Oh, quietly supported. How convenient. No proof, no publicity. Just your word that you're a saint." Janet Street Porter finally broke in. "Coleen, this is getting a bit personal, don't you think?" "Personal?" Coleen turned toward her with mock shock. "I'm just asking what everyone at home is thinking. Gary presents himself as a champion of the downtrodden. I'm simply asking where the evidence is." Kay Adams spoke softly. "I think Gary's been clear about his position. Maybe we could move on to the film." But Coleen wasn't done. She leaned forward again. "You know what really gets me, Gary? You talk about creative integrity, but you've made sequels, franchises, the big studio cash cows. You've taken the easy money like everyone else." Gary's hands gripped the armrests. "There's nothing wrong with sequels or franchises, Coleen. Some of the greatest stories ever told are part of larger universes. The Dark Knight trilogy, for instance, explored morality, corruption, justice." Coleen cut in with a scoff. "Oh, please. They're comic book movies, Gary. Let's not pretend they're Citizen Kane." Gary's voice rose, frustration bleeding through. "And what's wrong with comic book movies? Why can't popular entertainment also be art? Why can't a story that reaches millions still have meaning?" Coleen laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Because they're made for 12-year-olds. They're about people in silly costumes punching each other. It's not Shakespeare, is it?" The panel froze. Ruth looked horrified. Janet stared at Coleen in disbelief. Kay looked ready to sink through the floor. Gary straightened, eyes cold. "I'm sorry, but that's an incredibly arrogant thing to say. It's insulting. Not just to me, but to everyone who finds hope and inspiration in those stories. Who are you to decide what counts as real art?" Coleen shot back immediately. "I'm someone who's been in television for 20 years. I know what real entertainment looks like. And it's not grown men in capes." Ree's tone turned cutting. "Real entertainment? With respect, Coleen, this is a daytime talk show that spends most of its time gossiping about celebrities and relationships. Forgive me if I don't see you as the ultimate authority on artistic merit." The audience gasped audibly. Colleen's face flushed crimson. "How dare you?" she snapped. "How dare I what?" Gary shot back, his calm finally breaking. "Tell the truth? You've spent 10 minutes attacking my career, my character, and my intentions, dismissing entire genres and calling it journalism. When I defend myself, suddenly I'm the problem." Ruth stepped in desperately. "Okay, everyone, let's just take a breath." But Gary wasn't finished. "No, Ruth, I'm tired of taking breaths. I came here for a conversation about my work. Instead, I've been insulted, mocked, and talked down to by someone who clearly decided what she thought about me before I even sat down." Coleen leaned forward, voice rising to meet his. "Oh, don't be ridiculous. I haven't decided anything. I just asked you some hard questions, Gary. And you can't handle it because you're used to everyone in Hollywood kissing your backside." Gary's reply came like a whip crack. "Hard questions? These aren't questions, Coleen. They're attacks dressed up as conversation. There's a difference between journalism and harassment." "Harassment?" Coleen shot back, her tone dripping with disbelief. "Gary, you're on a talk show. This is what we do." Gary looked at her for a long silent moment, the studio lights reflecting off eyes that had gone cold and distant. And then, in one calm, deliberate motion, he reached for his microphone. "We ask questions. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be here." "You're absolutely right," Gary said, his voice suddenly calm again. But this time, it was the cold calm of a man past patience. "Maybe I shouldn't be here, because this isn't a talk show, Coleen. This is an ambush, and I don't have to sit here and take it." Janet tried to intervene, her tone strained. "Gary, please, let's just—" But it was already too late. Gary's hand was on his microphone pack, his movements deliberate. The air in the studio turned heavy, electric. Everyone in the room could feel what was coming, something that would change the tone of the show forever. And then Coleen said the one thing no one could believe she'd say out loud. "You know, what your problem is, Gary," she said, leaning forward with a sneer. "You think it because you've got an Oscar nomination and a fancy accent you're better than the rest of us. But you're not. You're just another washed-up actor desperate for attention, preaching about values from your ivory tower while the world moved on without you." The room fell dead silent. Even the audience forgot to breathe. Ruth Langsford's jaw dropped. Janet Street Porter looked nauseous. Kay Adams covered her face with both hands. Gary turned to her slowly. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the silence like steel. "What did you just say to me?" Coleen mistook his restraint for weakness and pushed further. "You heard me. Washed up. Desperate. Is that why you're here? To cling to whatever relevance you have left?" Gary's face drained of color. He stood up, still holding his mic pack, and said with quiet fury, "In 30 years of interviews, I have never, ever been spoken to with such contempt. What you just said isn't journalism. It's not even entertainment. It's cruelty, pure and simple." "Oh, come on, Gary," Coleen scoffed, though her voice trembled now. "Don't be so dramatic." "Dramatic?" Gary's voice rose sharply, echoing through the studio. "You just called me washed up on live television. You questioned my career, my integrity, my character, all for a cheap reaction. And now you call me dramatic for refusing to sit here and take it?" Ruth tried to step in. "Gary, please, let's just—" "No, Ruth." Gary's tone softened toward her, but stayed firm. "I'm sorry, but no. This isn't how you treat people. This isn't how you treat anyone." He turned back to Coleen, who now looked cornered, her confidence evaporating under the weight of his composure. "You want to talk about relevance?" he said, his voice steady, growing in power. "I've worked with Nolan, Fincher, Coppola. I've dedicated my life to storytelling, to giving everything I have to my craft. I've mentored younger actors, supported charities, and used my platform to give others a voice. I've earned my place in this industry. But I don't need to justify myself to you." "Gary, you're overreacting," Coleen snapped, her mask slipping. "Overreacting?" Gary's eyes blazed. "You've spent 15 minutes trying to humiliate me for sport, and now that I refuse to play along, I'm the problem?" He began detaching his mic cord. "You know what? You're right about one thing. I am better than this. Not because of fame or awards, but because I treat people with decency, because I know the difference between a hard question and an act of cruelty." Janet tried one last time. "Gary, we're all colleagues here, we're—" "Janet," Gary interrupted gently, shaking his head. "We're not in the same business. I create art. I tell stories. What happens here?" He gestured around the studio. "This is something else entirely." He rose fully, standing tall. The studio lights glinted off his expression, steady, proud, unshaken. "Coleen," he said quietly, "I genuinely feel sorry for you. I don't know what made you believe this is acceptable behavior. But it isn't. Not professional, not ethical, not human." Coleen, red-faced and trembling, stammered, You can't just walk out, Gary. We're live on television." Gary paused at the edge of the set and turned back one last time. His expression was calm now, resolute. "That's exactly why I am walking out," he said. "Because we're live. Because there are people watching who deserve better than this. Because someone needs to show that cruelty has consequences." He looked directly into the camera. "To anyone watching, this is not normal. This isn't how professionals behave. Don't ever let anyone convince you that humiliation is entertainment. Demand better. From others, and from yourselves." Then he turned to the remaining panelists. "Ruth, Janet, Kay, I'm sorry you were caught in this. You deserve better colleagues and a better environment than this." And with that, Gary Oldman walked off the set. The cameras followed him as he strode past the silent crew, past the stunned producers, and out through the studio doors. The echo of his footsteps filled the silence he left behind. For a long, unbearable moment, nobody spoke. The panel sat frozen. The audience stared. Even the crew didn't move. Finally, Ruth Langsford cleared her throat, her voice trembling. "We'll be right back after this break," she said softly. The cameras cut away, but the damage was done. In 34 seconds, Coleen Nolan had destroyed not just an interview, but her own credibility. She had exposed exactly what happens when arrogance and cruelty masquerade as entertainment. And Gary Oldman, dignified, unshaken, and utterly in control, had walked away with his integrity intact, leaving behind one of the most unforgettable moments in daytime television history.